Good day, everyone. My name is Brandon Giddey, and today I'll be presenting the effects of fire severity and tree size on the post-fire survival of Afrotemperate forest trees. This research was co-authored by Johan Bart from South African National Parks and Tineke Kraai from Nelson Mandela University. Firstly, I would like to introduce myself. I am a nature conservation master's student at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, and my thesis is looking at the effect of fire on Afrotemperate forests. As part of my BTech studies, I conducted a research project which used the difference normalized burn ratio, or DMBR, which is a satellite index for fire severity, to investigate how pine plantations disrupt the natural patterns of fire spread and severity in Afrotemperate forest. My master's project is a follow-on from my previous research, an attempt to better understand how a change in fire spread and severity may affect Afrotemperate forests. Therefore, as a part of my research, I've investigated the accuracy of satellite remote sensing indices in determining fire severity in Afrotemperate forest, as well as the effect of fire severity and tree size, as well as the effect that fire severity and tree size has on the post-fire survival of Afrotemperate forest trees. Here you can see a brief overview of the structure of this presentation. I will firstly describe the study area so that you're familiar with exactly where the study took place, followed by an introduction which will focus on the structure of Afrotemperate forest and the rationale for the study. I will then briefly describe the methods before moving on to the results and discussion. And finally, I'll give a short conclusion to wrap things up. If you have any questions after watching this presentation, please feel free to get hold of me. So the study took place in the Southern Cape region of South Africa. The Southern Cape region is characterized by steep east-west trending ridges of the Outeniqua and Tsitsikamma mountains, which form part of the Cape Fold Mountains and a coastal plateau to the south. Fire in the region is often driven by berg winds, translating to mountain winds, which are high-pressure systems in the interior that cause hot, dry conditions that blow northwesterly over the mountains towards the coast, creating high fire danger weather conditions. In 2018, a large wildfire driven by a berg wind burned over 70,000 hectares of fynbos plantation, Afrotemperate forest, thicket, as well as other lesser vegetation types within the area, between the towns of Riversdale in the west and Humansdorp in the east. The fire was made up of a number of spot fires. However, the study focused on the largest contiguous portion of the fire scar between George and Knysna in the central area of the Southern Cape Afrotemperate region. The portion of the fire between George and Knysna mostly burnt within the confines of the Garden Route National Park. In the Southern Cape, Afrotemperate forest is located in a matrix of fire-driven fynbos shrubland. However, large areas of fynbos have been converted to pine plantations, disrupting the natural patterns of fire spread and severity in the landscape. Afrotemperate forest has a defined structure of woody vegetation consisting of an emergent layer, canopy layer, and subcanopy layer, with an average canopy height of 20 to 25 meters. Emergents are the tallest trees that rise above the canopy, while canopy species are trees with a dominant or codominant position within the canopy of mature forest, and subcanopy species are shade-tolerant species directly underneath the canopy that will never reach canopy height. Emergence, canopy, and subcanopy species create a microclimate which does not support fire, making Afrotemperate forest a largely non-flammable ecosystem. Furthermore, Afrotemperate forest seldom burns due to its protected position in the landscape, known as fire refugia. Fire refugia are positions in the landscape which are protected from fire and berg winds. Fynbos shrubland and plantations of alien pinus species occur in wind and fire exposed positions, while Afrotemperate forest occurs in wind and fire protected positions within the landscape, as seen in the image here. Therefore, fire largely originates in the adjacent flammable fynbos shrubland and pinus plantations, and then loses its intensity as it moves into Afrotemperate forest due to its protected position in the landscape as well as its microclimate. However, under the correct climatic conditions, Afrotemperate forest is susceptible to fire. Drought disturbs the microclimate of Afrotemperate forests by desiccating the available fuel and therefore increasing flammability and allowing for ignition during high fire danger weather conditions. In the Southern Cape, it has been found that um, there's an increase in high fire danger weather conditions, which will potentially mean that these forests are more vulnerable to fire. And this is exactly what happened in 2018. On the 31st of October to the 6th of November in 2018, a total of 4,622 hectares of Afrotemperate forest burned. This was driven by high fire danger weather conditions as well as an extending preceding drought, which is the worst in recorded history. Based on the difference normalized burn ratio, 67% or 3,112 hectares of Afrotemperate forest burned at a low severity, while 33% or 1,500 hectares burnt at a medium to high severity. So this fire provided an extensive area of Afrotemperate forest which burnt at a varied severity, providing a valuable opportunity to assess the effects of fire severity and tree size on the post-fire survival of Afrotemperate forest trees. This will provide a better understanding on the resilience of these forests to fire, and therefore the objectives of this study were to assess the survival response of all Afrotemperate forest trees collectively for all the study species, and to individually assess the survival response of Afrotemperate forest trees which had a sample number of more than 40. This was done by demarcating 20 by 20 meter survey plots within burnt forest, and within each of these plots, tree size was measured at diameter at breast height, and trees larger than 10 centimeters were visually assessed for damage to the main stem between 0 and 2 meters above ground. Trees we recorded alive if they had resprouted from the main stem or there was any green foliage in the canopy, and all the surveys were done 19 to 24 months post-fire. In order to measure stem fire severity, as mentioned, damage to the bark and wood of the main stem was assessed between 0 and 2 meters above ground, and this was done as follows. Trees were recorded unburned if there was no evidence of fire, low if there was light charring of bark or patchy charring on the surface of the bark, medium if there was extensive charring of the bark and limited damage to wood, meaning the wood was blackened, cracked, or burnt away, and or charring of the wood, and then high if there was substantial damage to the wood, meaning the wood was charcoaled or completely burnt away. To analyze the data, a logistic regression model was used to assess the survival response of all trees collectively and for individual study species. When all species collectively were assessed, we included species as a random factor, and in both models, fire severity was treated as a 3-level ordered factor. A total of 88 plots, 40 species, and 1,378 trees were surveyed, and the average survival rate of Afrotemperate forest trees was 45%. Relative to post-fire tree survival rates in other forests of the world, Afrotemperate forest is most comparable to coniferous forest in North America, which had a post-fire survival rate of 50%, and tropical forest in Malaysia, which had a post-fire survival rate of 43%. However, the post-fire survival rate of Afrotemperate forest was lower than that in other temperate forests, such as temperate curry forest in Western Australia, which had a post-fire survival rate of 74%, and temperate mixed forest in Portugal, which had a post-fire survival rate of 92%. Furthermore, the post-fire survival rate was lower than neighboring dune thicket, which had a post-fire survival rate of 83%. The differing post-fire survival rate among forest types may be a consequence of the historical fire regime that these forests have adapted to, with species' ability to survive fire being related to the extent of fire exposure. Accordingly, this relationship may be reflected in fire-persistent traits. For example, in Australia, fire-prone tropical savanna trees had a thicker bark relative to tree size compared to that in non-fire-prone systems. and it was noted that fire thickness relative to tree size is a good indicator of fire occurrence between the two vegetation types. Our results further showed that post-fire tree survival was negatively related to fire severity, and this effect in Afrotemperate forest was more pronounced than that observed in the adjacent dune thicket, which burns more frequently and at a higher severity than Afrotemperate forest. Afrotemperate forest and dune thicket share common species, and those species common to both vegetation types on average showed a 29% lower post-fire survival rate in Afrotemperate forest than in dune thicket. This comparison thus further supports the notion of improved fire resilience in species or vegetation types that are more exposed to frequent or severe fires, as is also seen in comparisons between savanna and forest. Therefore, fire may also drive interspecific functional traits of trees that ensure resilience depending on the frequency and severity of fire experienced by the vegetation type. Tree size had a significant positive effect on post-fire survival, with the average post-fire survival rate of small trees, less than 20 centimeters diameter at breast height, approximately 50% lower than that of large trees, with a 80 centimeter diameter at breast height. These findings support evidence that trees occurring in vegetation such as Afrotemperate forests, which mostly experience low frequency and low intensity fires, may defer traits which protect the tree against fire until they are large. For example, thick sapling bark is typical of trees in habitats with open canopies, such as savanna systems, which are associated with frequent high severity fires, thus increasing the survival probability from an early developmental stage. On the other hand, thin sapling bark is common in trees in closed canopy forests experiencing low frequency and low intensity fires, and subsequently, thick bark development is deferred until the tree is mature. Furthermore, 32% of all trees surveyed resprouted from the main stem, and 5 species investigated in our study co-occur in dune thicket, and however they showed a lower incidence of resprouting in Afrotemperate forest with a 46% resprouting rate compared to dune thicket where they had an 87% resprouting rate. So when comparing the incidence of resprouting from the stem in co-occurring species between taller stature Afrotemperate forest and shorter stature dune thicket, it seems notably higher in dune thicket. And this supports evidence that investment of resources in resprouting may be less in canopy species of tall forest, which require fast vertical growth in competition for light, than in shorter stature dune thicket. So to move on to objective 2, a total of 10 species, of which 8 were dominant canopy species, were individually investigated for the effect of fire severity and tree size on survival. And it was found that 4 species had a high survival rate, greater than 60%, while 5 species had a low survival rate, less than 40%. And this links up with the evidence that globally fire is an important driver of species diversity. For example, species composition and diversity in Afrotemperate forest patches have in part been linked to the frequency and severity of fire along gradients. So Afrotemperate forest margins are typically experience more frequent and severe fires compared to the forest core. Um, and therefore the fire tolerant species or species with a high survival rate will likely dominate the forest margin, while species with a low survival rate will likely be restricted to the forest core. So, in conclusion, fire severity and tree size are significant determinants of post-fire survival of Afrotemperate forest trees, and species vary in their tolerance to fire. Furthermore, the survival response of resprouting abilities of Afrotemperate forest and neighboring more fire-exposed dune thicket differ, suggesting that the historical fire regimes associated with vegetation types likely drive species adaptations. And our findings suggest that fire severity and fire frequency and how it relates to tree size are important for maintaining species diversity and richness within and between forest types. And this highlights the need for the maintenance of a natural fire regime through management intervention, considering the increase in fire danger weather conditions, as well as the change in fire severity and spread due to alien pinus plantations.